This being Sunday, I want to mention religion a little bit. But before I talk about religion, the topic today is honesty, dishonesty, and corruption. And to get us started thinking about this, how many people here have lied at least once in 2013? Okay. How about the last month? I'm not going to ask you about the last hour. There's actually this very sad research where they take two people, they put them in a room, people who don't know each other, and they say, please introduce yourself to the other person. Talk to the other person for 10 minutes. At the end of the 10 minutes, they put them in different rooms, and they say, did you lie in those 10 minutes? And everybody says, me, of course not. And I say, well, luckily, we taped everything you said. Let's go over sentence by sentence. And at the end of this exercise, the majority of people agreed that they lied between 2 and 3 times in those 10 minutes. And the reality is that when we think about it, we recognize that we're dishonest lots of the time. At the same time that we recognize that we're dishonest, how many people here generally think of yourself as honest, wonderful people? Right? It's the same people. And this is the kind of conflict I want us to think about, which is on one hand, we recognize that we're not honest all the time. On the other hand, we think of ourselves as honest people. So let's think a little bit about religion. There's a story in the Bible that God comes to Sarah and says, Sarah, you're going to have a son. And Sarah laughs. And Sarah said, how can I have a son when my husband is so old? And God says, don't worry. That's my version of the Bible. The real one is slightly different, but God says, don't worry. Then he goes to Abraham and he says, Abraham, you're going to have a son. And Abraham says, did you tell Sarah? And God said, yes. And Abraham says, and what did Sarah said? And God lies. God said, Sarah said, how could she have a son when she is so old? And the religious scholars have wondered, how could God lie? And their conclusion was that it's okay to lie for peace at home. And I've talked to many religious scholars about this, and the basic understanding is that there's lots of human values, honesty being one of them, but not all human values are compatible all the time. And what happens when one human value clashes with another? Well, the realization is that honesty is not the one that wins every time. And we all understand this, right? That's why we don't think that the right answer to the question, honey, how do I look in that dress, is always the perfect truth. So we have this interesting, complex relationship with the truth. We recognize that if we want to live in society and we want people to like us and so on, some dishonesty is needed. But then as we move to the professional world, the rules change, right? While you might care that your significant other cares about you and don't want to tell you the honest truth all the time, you don't want your accountant not to tell you the truth. You don't want a government official. You don't want a banker not to be perfectly truthful. But the thing is that we learn our lessons about how to live in life in a social domain in which some dishonesty is not just needed but recommended, and then we move to the professional life where the rules are very, very different. So how do we manage those two? So I've done all kinds of lab experiments on dishonesty. I've also talked to some big crooks, and I'll tell you a little bit about both of those. So one of the guys I talked to, he's a guy who, when he was 12 years old, he was brought to work for his cousin. This was a chain of electronic stores in New York called Crazy Eddie's. And he was brought to work for his cousin. He was 12 years old. And this was a business that was not run according to the legal scheme. And they taught him the 3 rules of retail. The first thing they taught him is that every time a customer comes in trying to buy something cheap, they should try and sell them something more expensive. And they had the whole system of doing it. They had 3 salespeople who would attack every customer trying to convince them to buy something else. The second thing is they would try to keep it as a cash-only business. This way, the government would not get their hands on their money. They felt it was their money, no need to involve the government in this. They wouldn't pay any taxes on it. And the third thing was that every year they would take all the merchandise they couldn't sell, they would put it in one corner of the warehouse, they would break the pipes above it, they would take a hose and they would water all the merchandise, and then they would submit an insurance claim. Sometimes the insurance would allow them to keep the merchandise, in which case they would switch to a new insurance company and wet the same merchandise again the next year. So he grows up from age 12 in this environment that tells him that these are the 3 rules of retail, and then he gets to be 18. And he gets to be 18, he goes to college. And what do you think he goes to study? Accounting, where have you been? So he went to study accounting, and after 2 years in accounting school, he goes to his family, it's a family-run business, and he says, we have been doing things the wrong way. He says, we have been skimming. We've been taking an amount of money, we have not been paying taxes on that. That's called skimming. He said, that's no way to go. He said, if we really want to get rich, we need to have a public offering. We need to have an IPO. We need to become a public company. Then we could really get rich. So they have a plan to become a public company and to dump stocks. Now, when you want to have an IPO, you want to show an increase in revenues, because an increase in revenue will determine the multiplier, right? Now, how do companies get an increase in revenue? Most companies have to work harder. The Antor family has another possibility, which is what? They can cheat a little less. So for the next 4 years, they cheat by 25% less every year, until on the 4th year, they don't cheat at all. They show a dramatic increase in revenue, what seemed like a dramatic increase in revenue. They have an IPO, and they dump $100 million worth of stocks. Okay, up to this point in the discussion, Sam, the guy I was talking to, seemed like the poster boy for the Chicago School of Economics. The guy has no emotions. He doesn't care about anything. It's all about maximizing money. He doesn't care about his clients, his shareholder, insurance company, the government. He doesn't care about anything. But then I asked him about how the family eventually dissolved and most of them ended up in jail. And this is actually when the story changed. So his cousin, Eddie, had a wife called Debbie. And behind her back, everybody called her Debbie 1. You see where this is going. He also had a mistress, also called Debbie, and everybody called her Debbie 2. And Sam said that Debbie 2 was a slicker, more modern version of Debbie 1, but overall they shared a lot of similarities. Anyway, the Antor family was a hierarchical family. Eddie's father used to be the head of the family, and he would basically have court and tell people what to do and so on. But all of a sudden, Eddie gets $100 million worth of stocks. He becomes incredibly wealthy, and guess what? Everybody started going for advice to Eddie, not to his father. And his father is not so happy with the new social arrangement. So he tries to get power back. But he can't. It's very hard to fight $100 million. He tries. Finally, one New Year Eve, he calls Debbie 1 and gives her the apartment address for Debbie 2. And she goes to Debbie 2's apartment, and they have a big fight. Sam said that in their family, they call it the New Year Massacre. But the thing was that this was incredibly devastating for the family. In fact, as Sam is describing this incident, he turns to me and he's outraged. He's morally outraged. He looks at me and he says, there are some things you don't do. There are some lines you don't cross. You don't tell a wife about her husband's mistress. Everything else was perfectly fine. Taxes, customers, shareholders. This was really inconceivable that somebody would do it. And he was not the only one. Everybody in the family felt that this was an incredible moral violation. The family split into two. Each part told the FBI about the other part, and eventually the family dissolved. Now, when I first listened to this sounded like a very extreme case. He was a guy who took the range of moral activities and divided them into two. There was all the moral activities that had to do with the outside world, in which he had no morals whatsoever. He couldn't care less. But then he had all the moral activity connected to his family. And there he was incredibly moral. A handshake was a handshake, and your word was your word, and you don't tell a wife about her husband's mistress. Incredibly strict rules. And I thought, this is an extreme case, but are we all a little bit like this? So for example, how many people here have illegal software and music on your computers? Okay, I guess the people who didn't raise your hand, you just don't know how to do it. Now, I think in many ways, we took this activity of illegal downloads, and we know it's illegal. It's called illegal downloads, right? We took this activity and we say, we just don't care about it. This is an activity that is outside of the moral domain. How many of you would be embarrassed if the local newspaper had a story that you were found to have illegal music on your computer? I guess very few people would care, right? Because you took this activity and took it out of the moral domain. Now, Sam was extreme. He took lots of things out of the moral domain, but in reality, we're all capable of doing that. And that's, by the way, what I think corruption is. Corruption is that when we know something is illegal, but we don't care. And we don't care because we think this is what everybody else is doing, this is just the way you do business, and so on. We don't have the moral judgment connected to it. And as Paula was saying, and I'll tell you some more about this, the main reasons people act or don't act dishonestly is not about cost-benefit analysis and will I get caught and will I get punished. It's about how morally justified do you feel about this behavior at that moment. And the moment something becomes corruption, the moment you don't think of something within the moral domain, people stopped caring. So I talked to lots of other big cheaters in accounting fraud, insider trading, sports, and so on. But I want to tell you a little bit about the research we've done in terms of kind of academic lab experiments and how we study dishonesty. So here is our basic method. We have a few variations, but the basic method is the following. We take a sheet of paper with 20 simple math problems. These are problems that everybody could solve if you had enough time, but we don't give people enough time. If you were in the experiment, I would pass the sheet around, and I would say you have 5 minutes to solve as many of these questions as you can. I'll give you $1 per question, go. You would turn the sheet over, you would start working as fast as you can. At the end of the 5 minutes, I would say stop, put your pencil down, and now count how many questions you got correctly. You would count your questions. Now that you know how many questions you got correctly, please take this sheet of paper, go to the back of the room and shred it. And after you finish shredding it, come to the front of the room, tell me how many questions you got correctly, and I'll pay you accordingly. People do this, they shred, they come to the front of the room, they say they solve 6 problems on average, we pay them $6, they go home. What the people in the experiment don't know is that we played with a shredder. The shredder only shred the sides of the page, but the main body of the page remains intact. So you put your shit in, it shakes, it moves, everything feels good, but we can find out how many questions people really solve correctly. And what do we find? On average, people solve 4 problems and report to be solving 6. And this shift is not due to some big cheaters, it's due to a ton of little cheaters. In fact, we've done this on tens of thousands of people, and we found very, very few big cheaters. We found a ton of little cheaters. Okay, so now we have a method in which we can tempt people and measure their dishonesty. And now the question is, what is dishonesty due to? So the rational economic theory of dishonesty is about cost-benefit analysis. You say to yourself, what do I stand to gain? What do I stand to lose? What's the punishment? What's the chance to catch me? Is it worth it? So does this model describe what is happening in our experiment? So we tried that. We increased the value. We changed how much we paid people per correct questions. Some people, we offered them 10 cents. Some people, we offered 25 cents, 50 cents, $1, $2, $5, $10 per correct question. Do you think that as the amount of money per correct question increases, people cheat more? No. Lots of people cheat, just a little bit, but they don't seem to be sensitive to the amount of money. What about the probability of being caught? The same thing. We change the probability of being caught. You think that as you increase the probability of being caught, people will cheat less, but they don't. Lots of people cheat just by a small amount. So what's going on here? On one hand, it's clearly that people cheat. On the other hand, the cheating doesn't seem to respond to the standard economic forces of increased benefit or decreased probability of being caught. So we thought maybe what's going on is that people are trying to balance two forces. On one hand, we want to look at a mirror and think that we're good, wonderful, honest people. Think of it like ego utility, some satisfaction from your own view in your own eyes. On the other hand, we want to selfishly benefit from dishonesty. Now, you could say you could do one or the other. You can either look at yourself as honest, or you could benefit from dishonesty. We said, what if you can get both? What if as long as you cheat just a little bit, you can still think of yourself as an honest person? Right? What if there's a range, what we call a fudge factor, a range in which you could be slightly dishonest and still think of yourself as not losing any of your wonderful view of yourself in your own minds? So how could you check a theory like this? A theory like this is all about rationalization. It's all about how we can tell a story that says that this is okay, right? This does not blemish my image, at least in my own mind. So if this is all about rationalization, we should ask what kind of things would get rationalization to get bigger and therefore allow people to be more dishonest, and what kind of things would get people to be less able to rationalize and therefore make us more honest. So let me ask you, what kind of things do you think would get people to be able to rationalize more and therefore be able to be more dishonest? What would you suggest? If you're smarter. IQ. If you think your IQ. We actually tested IQ. What do you think? Do smart people cheat more or less? Just the same. But we found that creative people cheat more. Why? Because this is all about the story. It's about how you can cheat a little bit and feel good about yourself. It's about telling a story. If you're more creative, you can tell better stories. Get away with more. What else? Yeah. Remove money from the equation. That's right. So this is a very good, removing money from the equation. So we actually first thought about this idea because of a little joke. And the joke is that little Johnny comes home from school with a note from the teacher that said that little Johnny stole a pencil from the kid who's sitting next to him. And Johnny's father is furious. And he says, Johnny, I'm embarrassed and humiliated. You never steal a pencil from the kid who's sitting next to you. This is not how we raised you and educated you. And besides, Johnny, you know very well that if you need a pencil, all you need to do is to say something. Just ask, just mention it, and I can bring you dozens of pencils from the office. Now, if you think about this, right, it's kind of interesting. Why is pencil from the office something that we would feel good about taking, but taking 10 cents from petty cash box is not? Right? If you take 10 cents from petty cash box, even if you go and buy a pencil, you would feel like a thief. Right? There's something about the directness of money. So we've done it in all kinds of ways. Anybody here plays golf? No. So we did a study with about 18,000 golf players. And we asked them all kinds of questions. One of the questions was the following. He said, imagine the ball fell on the rough, not a good place, and you really wanted it to be 4 inches to the left. You really wanted it to be 4 inches to the left. Would you pick it up and move it? And people said, heaven forbid. I can't imagine doing that. Just by the fact you're asking me this question means you don't understand what the game of golf is all about. Nobody would ever pick a ball and move it by 4 inches. This is not golf. Okay, what about kicking the ball? Oh yes, we do that all the time. What about hitting it to the club? Even easier. And in the comments, people said that the easiest way is not to look. You kick and you don't look. That's there's some randomness in it. In the experiment we ran on this, we did the same experiment I described earlier with the simple math problems. But in one version, people come to the experimenter, give him the sheet of paper and said, Mr. Experimenter, I solved X problems, give me X dollars. In the second version, they say, I solved X problems, give me X tokens. Then they take the tokens, move 12 feet to the side and change them for money. What happened when you look into somebody in their eyes and you lie for something that is not money, but will become money very quickly? Our participants doubled their cheating. And this, by the way, is one of the most worrisome results I think we ever got. Because as a society, we're moving to things that have higher distance. Think about cash, electronic transfers, stock options, derivatives. Think about dealing with people face to face, dealing with people over great distances. Could it be that as these distances are increasing, people find it easier to be dishonest and not feel bad about it? I think the answer is absolutely yes. What other things do you think would increase rationalization? Other people are doing it as well, right? If everybody else is doing it, why should you feel bad about it? So in one experiment on this, we hired an acting student. We asked the acting student to sit in the front row, and 30 seconds into the experiment to raise his hand and say, "Excuse me, I solved all the question, what do I do next?" And in this version of the experiment, we prepaid everybody. We gave them all the money up front, and we asked them to leave us back the money they did not make. And the experimenter said, "You finished everything, you're free to go." And that person took all their money, you saw that they left nothing behind them, and walked home with all the money. What would you do? Lots more people cheat. But there could be two interpretations. One interpretation is that you've just learned that there are no negative consequences to cheating in this experiment. Here, somebody cheated, went away with it, nobody was chasing him, there's no downside to it. Another interpretation is that it's not about being able to get away with it. It's that because it seems socially acceptable. Here, we're in this group of people just like me are doing it, nobody seems to say anything, it's part of our social norm. So to test this, we've done a couple of things, but one of them was to change the outfit of the acting student. And here is why. We ran this experiment at a university called Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh. Everybody in the room was a Carnegie Mellon student. The acting student was a Carnegie Mellon student. He was wearing the regular Carnegie Mellon outfit. In another version of the experiment, he was wearing University of Pittsburgh sweatshirt. A competing university they don't like so much. What happens when it's somebody from a different culture? It's a culture we don't like so much. Now, if he stands up and cheats, you still know you can get away with it. Nobody's chasing you, but socially it's not acceptable. And what happened now? Cheating actually went down. So this basically suggests that it's about socially accepted things, and when things are accepted within our social group, this is incredibly influential. Where things are not part of our group, that's not the case. And by the way, from that perspective, you can think about politicians, right? What do you think is the social circle of politicians? It's often other politicians. Now, I'm sure this doesn't happen in Africa, but in England, a few years ago, there was a big scandal where lots of members of parliament started using public money to renovate their homes, treating their gardens, doing all kinds of this nature. And when the public found out about it, people were outraged. But the reality is that if everybody you know is a member of parliament and one person starts misbehaving, very quickly it becomes a social norm where everybody thinks it's acceptable. By the way, if you think about this story up to now, this is really a story about conflicts of interests. It's a story about the fact that if people pay us an amount of money to see reality in a certain way, we can see reality in that way. And you know, this is something that every sports fan knows. If you are a particular fan of a particular team, and your team is playing against somebody else, and the referee is calling a call against your team, you can't help but think of the referee as evil, vicious, stupid, blind, something like that. This is a motivation to see your team successful. What if the motivation is financial? What if the motivation is ideological? You know, we think about that we can take people and put them in a situation with conflicts of interest, and people can see things directly, see things objectively. The reality is that it's really not possible. We're deeply colored by the motivation that surrounds us, and we can't see reality in an objective way. And I'll tell you one personal story about this. So I was in hospital for a long time, and about 5 years after I left hospital, I came back for a checkup. And the head of the burn department finds me, said, "Dan, I'm so happy you're here. I have a new fantastic treatment for you." Okay? He said, "Come to my office." I come to his office, and he says that when I shave, I have stubble, little black dot on the left side of my face. but the right side of my face is burned, so there's no hair and there's no stubble. So what is he proposing? He's going to tattoo the right side of my face to match the left side of my face. He says, go home, shave, come back tomorrow, I'll make you symmetric. And I drive home and I think to myself, what level of shave should I have on the left side to be symmetric? Early morning shave, afternoon shadow, you know, what would maximize the hours of symmetry? Anyway, I come back to his office the next day and I said, you know what, I'm not so sure I want that. I said, can you show me some pictures of people who've done it before? So he shows me pictures of two people, but he can't show me the whole face. He just showed me a picture of their cheeks with some black dots. You know, it looked just as you would expect. Then I said, you know, what happened when I grow older and my hair gets white? He said, don't worry, we can laser it out when the time comes. I said, you know what, I don't think it's for me. And then he gives me this guilt trip. He says, Dan, what's wrong with you? I said, do you enjoy being non-symmetrical? Do you get some deprived pleasure from looking different? Do women feel sorry for you? He went on and on about this. I left his office, I went to his deputy, I said, what's going on? And his deputy said, well, we've done it to 2 people already. I knew, I saw the picture. He said, we need a 3rd person for an academic paper. Now I understand the pressure of academic publications, but here's the thing. I was in hospital for 3 years. This guy was my physician for 3 years. He was an amazing physician. The right side of my right eyebrow is a transplant. And I frankly couldn't care about half an eyebrow. And he wanted to operate on this, and I couldn't care less, so I said no. So he said, okay, what if when other people operate you for something else, he'll operate and do the eyebrow? I said, that's fine. I don't want another operation, but if you're doing it when somebody else is doing it, that's fine. So they did some operation on my hand, and he was supposed to do it at the same time. The problem is that the team that was doing the operation on my hand needed much more space, and he didn't have space for my eyebrow, so he started working at 8 at night, and he worked for 8 hours doing this operation. It looks like it's simple, but he actually took a Doppler machine, he tracked the blood vessel, he isolated a piece of hair, tracked the blood vessel back, isolated it. Amazing operation. Now here's the thing, this guy really cared about symmetry. He also really cared about me, and he was an amazing physician. He was an amazing physician every day for 3 years. I can't think of him, sadly he passed away 10 years ago, I can't think of him in any way but the most positive, glowing way. Nevertheless, at that moment, he wanted a 3rd patient for his paper. And at that moment, he had a conflict of interest, and he couldn't see straight. Right? He saw it from his perspective. And you know, if you think about the financial crisis, you think about governments, you think about what are the chances that we could take good people, put them in a situation of bad conflicts of interest, and they'll do things the right way. The odds are very low. In fact, if any of us would have been put in that situation, most likely we would have been behaving badly. Just think about the financial crisis. Imagine that in 2006, I would put you in the head of a bank or as a trader, and I would give you $5 million a year if you could only see mortgage-backed securities as a good product. Don't you think you could do it? I'm not saying wouldn't you lie. No, of course you wouldn't lie. But wouldn't you be able to see them as better than they are just because you have this financial incentive? And what if everybody around you was doing the same thing? And what if they were difficult to calculate and multiple steps removed for money? Now you can see about how taking good people, putting them in bad situation can only result in bad outcome. I want to say something about the good side of dishonesty. So in the same way that you say, how do we get people to cheat more, we can also ask, how do we get people to cheat less? So the idea here also came from a little joke, and the little joke is that a guy goes to the rabbi. I'm giving you the Jewish version. You can play in your mind a different version. A guy goes to the rabbi, and he said, Rabbi, you wouldn't believe it, but somebody stole my bicycle from synagogue. And the rabbi is appalled. Stealing your bicycle from synagogue? He said, this is terrible. He said, here is what you do. Come to synagogue next week and sit in the front row. And as we go over the 10 Commandments, turn around and look at everybody in the eyes. And when we get to thou shalt not steal, see who can't look you in the eyes, you'll know that's your thief. The guy is very excited, comes to synagogue, sits in the front row, turns around doing the 10 Commandments. After the services, the rabbi can't wait. He's so anxious. Did it work? So he waits for this guy at the end of the service, says, so did it work? The guy said, like magic. He says, like a charm. He says, the moment we got to thou shalt not commit adultery, I remembered where I left my bike. You're probably wondering, where's the experiment? We went to UCLA, and we asked 500 students to try and recall the 10 Commandments. Interestingly, none of them could recall all 10 Commandments, and many of them invented new interesting ones. But what happened after we asked people to try and recall the 10 Commandments? Nobody cheated. And it wasn't that the people who remembered more commandments, the more religious, didn't cheat, and the people who remembered hardly any commandment cheated more. In fact, even when we take self-declared atheists and ask them to swear on the Bible, they stop cheating. So it's not about heaven and hell and consequences. It's about reminding people at the moment about their own moral structure. That's the good side of human nature. It means that when we get people and we remind them at the moment about their own morality, people do behave much better. The question is, do we do that? We did one study like this with a big insurance company. This is an insurance company that sends people letters asking them to report how many miles they drove last year. And of course, if you got one of those letters, you want to say you drove less because your insurance premium would go down. So some people fill the number, how many miles I drove, and sign at the bottom. And some people sign at the top. The people who sign at the top primed themselves with being honest, and they cheated much less. Maybe they didn't cheat at all, we don't know. But there was a 15% difference, 2,400 miles difference in the reported amount of driving. So again, it suggests that if we just remind people at the right moment, people would stop cheating or at least reduce it. I want to tell you two last things. One is the question of what happens when we give people chances to cheat many times. So everything I told you up to now was a one-time cheating. What happens when we give people hundreds of opportunities to cheat? One of the patterns we see is we see people cheating a little bit, and then at some point people switching and start cheating all the time. And we call this the what the hell effect. And we thought about this, if people cheat all the time, in religious thought, if you say I'm going to hell, you might as well enjoy it, right? People, by the way, know this thing from dieting, right? If anybody here has been on a strict diet, then you say, oh, I violated my diet again, let me go for it, I'll start next Monday or I'll start tomorrow. So we thought, okay, if people have this what the hell effect, start cheating a little bit, switching, cheating all the time, what would stop people? So we thought about the Catholic confession. Anybody here Catholic? Okay, a few. Anybody grew up Catholic? A few more. Okay. So this is no offense to the Catholics in the room, but we went to talk to real Catholics. We went to Italy. We went to talk to Italian priests, and we said, please explain to us confession. If you think about it, if you can sin and get absolved, wouldn't you sin more? In fact, wouldn't you sin on the way to confession to minimize time in purgatory? That seems like the recipe. And the priest said, no, no, no. So he came up with 3 theories of confession. One theory is you look forward to confession. You say, well, I'll sin. They might catch me, they might not. But for sure, I'll have to talk to the priest, and that will be unpleasant, and I don't want that. We have no evidence for that theory. Another theory is like the 10 Commandments. You leave confession, and you feel pure and wonderful. And you want to keep that feeling for a while, so you stay honest for a little bit after that. We have some evidence for that. But what about the what the hell effect? We got people to cheat a little bit, moving, cheating a lot, and we gave them a chance to confess. We gave them a sheet of paper. We said, if you've done something bad recently, write about it and then shred it for real. If you want to ask for forgiveness, do it, shred it. What happened after both of these elements? Cheating goes down dramatically. Right? And this, I think, is something that is actually quite smart in religious thought, understanding the importance of opening new pages, fresh starts. I think the South African Reconciliation Act was another civic example for that, right? How do you move from apartheid to post-apartheid? Is there a smooth transition? No. But if you stand up there and you say, here are all the awful things we've done, at least it creates some demarcation in saying how we're going to move forward. The last thing I want to tell you is about cultural differences. So how many of you think that people in Africa would cheat less than Americans? How many of you think that people in Africa would cheat more? How many of you think it's just the same? Okay, very good. So we've tried all kinds of countries. We haven't done Africa yet. You're on our list. I grew up in Israel, so the first country I went to test was Israel. How many of you think that people in Israel cheat more than the Americans? Only one. You're a very politically correct group. I was sure that the Israelis would cheat more than the Americans. They don't. They cheat just the same. Francesca Gino, my Italian collaborator, said, come to Italy. We'll show you. The Italians cheat just the same. We tried England. We tried Turkey. We tried China. We tried Colombia, South America. We tried Germany. Everybody cheats the same. We even tried Canada because the Canadians always think they're better. They're not. And the reality is we don't find these differences. Now, here's the thing. It's kind of interesting that we don't find any differences. But when you think about culture, and you think about traveling, and you think about different countries, all of us have seen cheating being very different in different places. So how can it be that our experiments don't show any differences? And here's our basic understanding of this. Our experiments are general and abstract. And because of that, they measure the basic human capacity to cheat and feel good about that. And in that regard, we're all the same the world over. But it doesn't matter that culture doesn't matter. Culture does matter, but it matters on top of that. We have this basic ability to cheat a little bit and feel good about ourselves, but then culture comes on a domain-by-domain specific way, such as the example with Sam. Cultures say, illegal downloads, don't worry about it. Paying VAT, don't worry about it. Bribing a policeman, if they catch you driving, don't worry about it. So cultures are not different in the whole approach to honesty, but we do have these changes of domain by domain. So let me just tell you one last joke as an ending. I told you a little bit about Judaism, a little bit about Catholicism. A guy goes to confession and he says, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." And the father said, "What have you done, my son?" And the guy said, "I'm 72 years old and I just had sex with 2 young twins, 25-year-old twins." And the priest said, "This is terrible. This is awful. I can't believe you've done this. I want you to say 1,000 times Hail Mary and walk 10 times around the church and give $1,000 to charity. And how long has it been since your last confession?" The guy said, "I've never been to confession. It's my first time." "What? You're 70 years old and you've never been to confession? How can that be?" So "I'm Jewish." So the priest said, "If you're Jewish, what are you doing here and why are you telling me?" He said, "I'm telling everybody." Thank you very much.